Tim Daly, you look awesome.
Yeah. Hang on, though. I got to figure out this red thing. I may switch back over to the just to the Mac camera. I mean, the camera looks good. We attached a little camera up here, but I'm not sure where the settings are to play with it.
Well, realize most people are just listening to us and not watching us.
How would you fix it? Hey, look who's here. Look who's here.
Hey,
Oh, it's
Carl,
beautiful.
nice
Barbara, hi.
I know. Uh-oh, she hasn't aged a bit, Carl.
No,
Yeah.
you and I got all the gray hair.
No,
How does that work?
You don't have any, man. You're looking fine.
Yeah.
Barbara, should I just not worry about it?
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Okay, all right, we'll go.
So, Tim, what is totally awesome about these podcasts that I've been doing this year is I probably haven't seen you in 30 years since you left KGW in 1991.
Right.
Yeah. We've been friends on Facebook. We've been friends on Facebook and shared family things and that kind of stuff. But our desks used to be about as far apart as these two windows on the YouTube. But to get back in touch with people after all these years and be able to share memories and stories has just been a blast.
I remember seeing one of these, I don't know, 3 months ago, and then you know how it is. You lose track and blah blah blah. And then Friday, I had a really slow day. Don't tell the boss. I had a really slow day. And I must have watched 4 or 5. And it was just a kick, especially seeing Regan was a real kick.
Regan Ramsey.
Yeah.
We will get to that man eventually here in this discussion.
I figured we would. Actually, you know why? It was because Brian Robertson had posted his. I watched it, and then I got curious and started fishing around and found a bunch of the other conversations.
Well, I hope you enjoy many more to come. Boy, we were lucky that you landed at KGW in Portland. I remember you were a University of Arizona guy, right? Is that right? Or you worked in Tucson before you came to Portland.
Yeah, I came up from Tucson. Both my wife and I, it's a long story of the whole the broadcast route that people take. We were both from Northern California and always wanted to get back to Northern California, but I grew up in Astoria. So Portland to me was, as I was growing up as a kid, the big city.
Yeah.
Plus, I still had a lot of family in Portland, my grandmother and aunts and uncles and cousins. So it was kind of a deal to make that big jump to the next big market if I could. Portland was on my list of places that I really wanted to try and go to. So it was from Tucson, which is like the 82nd market in the country, up to Portland, which I think at the time was 25 or 26. So that was a good jump for a kid like me.
Yeah. And you were hired by Regan Ramsey, as were many of our really talented photojournalists and reporters over that era. Your interview with him sounded very typical Regan Ramsey.
I knew, I think I knew a little bit about Regan before the interview, but I knew a lot about him after the interview, and that is he is his own man.
Yeah.
And so he sounds gruff on the phone, and he can come off as gruff in person. He really isn't. He's kind of a sweetheart, but he kind of has that rough exterior. And he told me on the phone, I'm going to pick you up at the airport on Saturday. Come on in. We'll do this interview thing. Okay, fine. So I get off the plane, and I don't know what he looks like. So I probably spent 10 minutes uncomfortably at the airport thinking, is that him? Is that him? No one's coming up to me. He's seen my tape, so he knows what I look like.
There's nobody standing there with a Tim Daly sign.
Remember that old Bud Light ad, Doctor? I forget the. Anyway, yeah. So 10 minutes after, I'm the only guy left in the airport. I figure he's not coming to get me, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The place should be busy, but it's empty. Now my fear is if I call the station to say, "Where's Regan Ramsey? I'm here for a job interview." My fear is I'm calling the poor guy who doesn't know that this opening exists. I mean, yeah. I'm really overthinking this, right? I'm way too nervous. Finally, I call. Somebody on the desk says, "Well, I'll call him. I'll find out what he's doing." So the guy calls me back at the airport and says he forgot about the interview. He says, "Just get a cab." So he forgot one, and now I'm grabbing a cab from the airport, which is fine, and I'm coming into the station. And then he escorts me in, and because it was a Saturday afternoon, and he had, like all news directors, their office always has 3 TVs on the wall. Regan had 3 different football games going. I don't think he looked at me more than for 3 seconds at the very start of the interview. He had his feet up on the desk. He watched football, asked me a couple of questions. I assumed it was going very poorly. Half hour later, I'm taking a cab back out to the airport, and I thought I would never hear from him again. And turned out I didn't screw up apparently too badly. He offered me a job.
Well, they're probably the football games were probably very compelling, and they were worth his attention. And he knew he was going to hire you anyway, probably.
He may have had money on the games for all I know.
Yeah, that's for sure.
No, it was everything about him was he did not fit the description of your typical news director, and that day was just another example.
So that was 86?
86, yeah. I think I came up in November of 86, so it was September or October. Then I went home, took the job, moved, packed, the whole thing. So yeah, it was fall of 86.
Yeah, I was probably back in the sports department recording those football games for a sports highlight package while you were in there talking to Regan.
The good old days of literally looking for every possible hour of videotape that you could plug into a machine, because you never know when that touchdown's coming, and yet you had to have 3 hours of videotape from the USC Ohio State game.
Yeah, well, that was the way it worked back then, because you didn't have the feed system that sent you highlights of everything. You had to choose which games you wanted to record and get highlights, and you know if you went to the bathroom and forgot to change the tape and that was the big play, tough luck.
Or if you were recording, let's say back in engineering, because I did sports at a number of my stations, so I'm very familiar with the go to engineering and you're popping in tapes and all these decks, and all it takes is the engineer who's in the feed room that day to go eject, stop, eject, and you go back for your highlights. There's nothing to be found anywhere because somebody just hit stop.
Yeah, they all of a sudden started recording some commercial.
Infomercial, 30-minute infomercial on a Saturday afternoon.
So you did many things in the news department at KGW. I mean, you were a general assignment reporter, and you covered Portland for 5 years. One of the things that was interesting that you talked about was you did a lot of work with gangs, which at that point in time were just beginning to become a major issue in Portland.
It was probably a year and a half, 2 years after I started, and I had been doing general assignment both on the night shift and then on the day shift. One day, Regan sees me walking by his office and says, "Daly, come in here." And I'm thinking, oh God, now what did I do? He tells me, "You're our gang reporter." I didn't even know we had a gang reporter opening, but that became my beat. Somebody might be at City Hall, somebody might have state government. That was considered as an important enough topic in Portland at the time. And it's always important, but it was such a new crime wave, if you will, and a new crime development that all of the stations were actually creating gang reporters to report on this growing trend of crime that really caught Portland off guard. So I think at the start I was thinking, oh my God, this is not how I pictured my career going. But at the same time, I think I was flattered that they trusted me to try and grab this beat and tell important stories, find and then tell important stories that help people in and around the Portland area understand what was going on, because it was kind of almost charming that Portland wanted to get to the bottom of something. And that's what I liked about journalism at KGW. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to tell that we're going to figure out what the story is. We're going to figure out why something is happening, and we're going to tell it to our viewers so they have a better understanding. And it was also very competitive because, as I say, all the stations were doing it. So there was somebody out at Coin and somebody at K2. We would see each other on all the stories, and it was very competitive in our perspectives in our terms, is in that we were trying to get the story that the other guy didn't get. Yeah. But it was also done for journalistic reasons. We were, like I said, we were trying to tell an important story.
My guess is that it really developed your reporting skills. You were a good reporter, you're a general assignment reporter, but to all of a sudden given this important beat and basically created it on your own, the connections you needed in the community, the connections you needed in law enforcement, there was a wealth of storytelling to do in that genre, but I bet you became really good at that aspect of reporting by being thrown in at that point.
Well, yeah, if you learn as you go, and you make a lot of mistakes when you first start. It was the first time in my career, and only been a reporter, it seemed like at the time, and maybe you felt the same thing as a young guy, I'm not moving up fast enough. I've been here 5 whole years. Well, I should be president of the place by now, As a reporter, I'd only been doing it since the early 80s, but by 86 or 7, I sort of had this, why haven't I moved further? Why don't I know more? Why don't I have more responsibilities? Well, if you just learn to slow down and soak it in as you go, take your time, you're going to be better at it if you do. So that was a really good experience for me professionally and journalistically, to learn how to have a single beat, develop those sources, make sure you don't burn sources because they're never going to talk to you again. Earn the trust of people who might be a little less than thrilled that you're trying to tell a particular story. If you report a story accurately and fairly, it's going to be slightly easier the next time to get the trust from those people you're talking with. And so, yeah, it was an experience. It took a while. And, I talked about the competition between the other stations. The reporter at Coin was probably 10 years older than me, and he'd been doing it slightly longer, the whole gang thing. He beat me on a regular basis until I started, feeling that I had a better handle on the town, on the problem, on the people addressing the problem. And gradually, I think we caught up. What's funny is, not funny, I was remembering back, we took that so seriously, that topic, that we actually produced, and I forget who worked with me, and they did wonderful work. We produced, late 80s now, 2 different half-hour, if not hour-long, primetime specials. I mean, they were town halls that we put on. I mean, I'm sure the station lost money, putting that material on the air instead of whatever game show or talk show or sitcom would have been there. But the station took that story so seriously that we'd invite in all sorts of experts and not, it wasn't just law enforcement. It was, people from the social services fields, whatever we could do to try and help tell that story. And so that was a real proud part of my career, was taking part in those long specials that, like I say, we really dove deep into that topic, and a lot of questions, and hopefully we provided a lot of answers.
Well, and that was the leadership of Regan Ramsey, who had been emboldened by the Bullitt family that owned the station, that we don't care about that bottom line. We want to, whatever you can do to better help this community with all these issues is what we want to do. And he took that to heart. And that was one example of that we did in our newsroom.
It was, yeah. I mean, I heard in your interview with Regan, that was thoroughly enjoyable because he's such a character, but he was a great leader for our newsroom. And he was, like I say, he was not your typical news director. He was not worried about dollars, or if he was told by his bosses, knock it off.
Yeah.
We want you to be more worried about the impact that you're making in your community. And so, for us to be able to go to management and say, how about a half-hour special? There was not a moment of hesitation. Yes, we will do that. We will make it happen. And they gave us all the time we needed to tell a lot of really good stories. I mean, as I recall, there were 5 or 6 reporters over a 2 or 3 week period, all assigned to different stories that were telling different elements of the big picture. And everybody was given all the time they needed to make those stories not just slapped together, but something that was serious journalism.
I'm a little bit disappointed that, I was a sports reporter there, and I eventually switched to news, which I don't regret at all. But I'm a little envious of all you guys that got to be news reporters under Regan's leadership. I think I would have really benefited from being part of that group. I made that leap probably 4 or 5 years later, but I'm having learned a lot about him and talked with a lot of you guys that worked with him. I didn't get the full benefit of the Regan Ramsey effect because of where I was working at the time. Last thing about the gang specials and the gang coverage is how new it was. I remember the first gang shooting and killing in Portland, and they named the victim, and it was a kid who'd played high school basketball at Grant High School.
Yep.
Because I remember, we have video of that kid. And I was so naive. I thinking that kid can't be in a gang. He's on a high school basketball team. And then, this is a bigger problem than we in Portland knew when that was the effect.
Yeah, I forget his last name. Ray was his first name. It was his
Right.
nickname.
Right.
And I was going through some old video because I wanted to become familiar in my brain before I chatted with you, that I don't come off as an old man who's completely lost all of his memory. But
Not all of it.
I saw those stories, and I think he was destined to go play at U of O too. He was like 6'2" or 6'3". He was a guard. He was a fabulous basketball player, and yet he got caught up in that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it really emphasized for folks wondering, what's this problem all about? And it only affects this family, but not that family.
Yeah, it just blew me away. I was so,
Yeah.
just as I said, naive in my little sports world, and I just thought that was so independent of this gang problem that we heard about from other cities. But
yeah,
tell me about your trip to Vietnam with photographer, I believe it was Terry Renneria.
Yeah, it was.
And Regan went with you as a producer. I remember now that you mentioned that you went there. What was the impetus for the stories?
One morning driving into work, I am listening to Kink Radio, a good employee. I'm listening to the radio station upstairs, right? They had on a Lewis and Clark professor who was talking about his upcoming trip to Vietnam and how he was going to go back with a few veterans and a few historians, travel buffs who had really, this is the mid to late 80s. People aren't going to Vietnam as tourists. No one's even thinking of it. In fact, the State Department basically advised against our trip happening. It wasn't illegal to go there, but it was advised against it. So I walked into Regan's office one morning, and here's the deal. When I first started there, I'm sure some reporter had just come back from China.
John Tuttle.
Some reporter had just come back from Africa. And another reporter probably just came back from, and I could not believe I was working in a newsroom where this was happening.
Ann Curry went to Nicaragua with Kevin Feltz. John Tuttle went to China with, I can't remember if it was Milt or Brian Robertson. Eventually, remember Larry Shoup and Brian Robertson went to Kosovo.
So, I mean, that was, to me, I came from much smaller markets. But I also came from markets where you were just sort of doing the regular news thing. And now I'm in a newsroom where this is considered, even though it's kind of wild and crazy to travel halfway around the world for a story, if you can justify it, if there are good pictures, good stories, and a reason to go.
And a link to Portland.
Yeah, let's go. It was like, so I ran it by Regan one morning. Do you want to think about? He said, yeah, let's just do it. Do you want to think about it some more? No, let's go. So Terry Renneria was a longtime photographer there, and Regan said, we'll have Renneria go. And then here came the surprise element. Regan goes, oh, and I'm going too. He's good. Regan is an ex-photographer, a great ex-photographer. He's my boss, so what am I going to say? Plus, 3 people traveling on a story like that for 2 weeks, halfway around the world, is better than 2 people doing it. Regan was able to step in and help out with photography. We were carrying a lot of gear. So we were able to make this really difficult assignment happen a lot smoother than it would have been with just 2 of us. Regan also had a history in Vietnam.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of this, is he's never really talked much about it, but he was there during conflicted times in that country.
Yeah.
And so he knew more about that than your average producer.
I think he felt it was smart for him to go because he knew the country. I think I think he wanted to go because he wanted to make sure that his crew going there were in good hands.
Yeah.
Vietnam was just over 10 years out of the last days and months of the war.
Right.
I think we imagined as Americans, this is still an unsettled place. This is a dangerous place. Well, we learned it may be slightly unsettled, but people there were just trying to live their lives, and it was anything but dangerous. We couldn't walk 10 steps in Vietnam with about 1 million little kids surrounding us, touching us, shaking our hands, saying hello, laughing at every lame joke we would try and share with them. Whether it was youngsters or old folks in Vietnam, everybody there couldn't have been more friendly. We came away with and it was hardly our theory. I've heard it 100 times since, but Americans tend to think of the Vietnam War as the Vietnam War. Vietnam has been through a lot of wars. We were just the latest.
Right.
And frankly, those folks were sick and tired of all the wars. So the fact that the most recent one had been 10 years prior, it had ended, the country was experiencing some growth, some normal opportunities, they were just relieved. And it didn't matter that we were from the US. They were welcoming to visitors. So yeah, we 2 weeks there. Actually, you know what? Here's another Reaganism. We were scheduled for 2 weeks, but we learned after getting there, because it was still early on, you only went as a tourist. You only went where the Vietnamese government let you go.
Sure.
It was a very structured tour. So if you're on the bus and the schedule is you're going to the War Museum that morning at 10, you went to the War Museum at 10. And then you were going to go to this War Museum at 1. And then, in other words, there was a political bent to the government structure for where we went. And by the end, we started in what used to be Saigon. We spent time in the middle of the country. We ended up in Hanoi. I mean, we saw the whole place. Reagan, towards the end, said, you know what? I've seen enough museums. We're going home. So he told the guy that had set up our tour, we're out of here. And frankly, I think as a journalist, he had seen enough. He felt a little controlled maybe by the Vietnamese government and how we were able to do our jobs. There wasn't a lot of chances for us to wander out of the hotel and go get whatever we wanted as far as interviews. You know, you have to set up interviews. Now suddenly our tour guide is getting involved and he may not want that. So Reagan at the end said, we're out of here. And I think he paid out of his own pocket to get us home early, as opposed to following through with the original travel plans, because frankly, he'd seen enough. It was all wild for me. I'm in my late 20s, and to this day, if I'm speaking to a group of college kids or whatever, what's the most interesting story you've ever done? I always go back to, well, back in the mid 80s, I went to Vietnam for a couple of weeks, and it really is eye-opening for people to hear that a young journalist way back then got to go over there and learn about that country and tell those stories.
Yeah, I think you guys discovered a little bit that it was still this, the communist government was still running things, but there were these little dashes or experiments into capitalism that those opportunities were beginning to manifest themselves in that country.
Yeah, and in fact, I don't know if you've talked to anybody that has traveled there in the last 10 or 15 years. It's beautiful, and now it has developed like we imagined back then it was going to develop. In fact, one of our nights, we were on China Beach, which I think is, and I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, right next to Da Nang. The Air Force Base at Da Nang was right next to China Beach. They made a TV show out of it years later. We stayed in a concrete bunker-like hotel. It looked like a Holiday Inn, but it was not a Holiday Inn. The power would go out, the water might have worked, and yet it was so beautiful. You could only imagine that 20 or 30 years into the future, it was going to be this fabulous destination for people that like to travel around the world. And that's what it's become. But you're right, back then, it was still a closed country. It was not easy to get into, and you followed their rules. It's not like guys were following you with bayonets and guns, but at the same time, you could tell it was a controlled country.
Yeah, that's amazing, Tim, because you and I are about the same age. So we grew up with that Vietnam War in the background of our childhoods. And
yeah.
I mean, I can remember, I thought that was what happened to young boys. They grew up, they graduated from high school, and they got drafted and they went to Vietnam. Luckily, that ended, 3 or 4 years before I became draftable age. But I always, I'm sure the same for you, is that always, just that word and those memories, that was a scary thing for kids, boys our age, for that time.
And we grew up in the 60s when television news first really captured on a near daily basis the effects of a war halfway around the world. But what CBS News especially did in Vietnam, and a lot of agencies, whether it was New York Times or the other networks, but what they did in putting that war in our living room, for you and I, we're 8, 10, 12, and it was jarring what we were seeing. And you and I were probably both interested in broadcasting at the time, so we're paying more attention to. I mean, I was growing up on the Oregon coast. It was raining all the time. I was always inside watching television, whether it was sports on the weekends or newscasts at night. And I remember watching all those network newscasts. And you're right, I was frankly nervous about who's going there and when is it going to be my turn.
Right. Yeah. I can remember. Do you remember the lottery for the draft?
Oh yeah.
They used to have that, and they would broadcast it. And my parents, my dad, the math teacher, we thought it was a game. Is my birthday coming up? Is my birthday coming up?
Right.
And my dad, the math teacher, was rooting for our birthdays to come up because he knew the odds of them coming up when my brother and I got that age would be less than. Although that's not actually the way the math works on it. But I can remember, thinking, 4 or 5 years later, I would have been watching that draft lottery going, please don't be that date.
I can recall clearly sitting in Astoria with my mom and my brother, who was several years older than me, and he was that age. And his birthday came up in the top 10, and my mom was instantly in tears.
I bet.
And I'm younger then, but I gathered this is this is serious stuff. And through a variety of red tape issues, I'm not sure exactly how it all played out. He did not get drafted, but when his number, I think he was 6 or 7, it rattled my mom. And that was a memory. That's a memory of sitting there watching the draft lottery on television. And it's interesting. Yeah,
different kind of draft lottery that we watch now. But I just thought that was fascinating that, a reporter in their late 20s now going to Vietnam would have a totally different perspective than you did growing up when you did. And I'm sure that's just a really kind of a well-rounded circle to grow up when you did and to go there as a journalist and learn about the country when you did. Great experience.
Oh yeah, it was fabulous. And we had a veteran in our group. He was from the East Coast, and he was great. He understood why we were looking for stories, and he didn't mind being one of our stories. But we kept an eye on him when we would go out on and it wasn't just war museums, as I was saying earlier. We had plenty of countryside, and a blown up, burned out tank off in the ditch as we would go by it. I mean, that was still in existence. And we would keep an eye on him to see how he was reacting. And he was just soaking everything up. He didn't have a miserable experience being there. He wasn't afraid to go back and learn about the country where he had probably seen a lot of horrible and awful things. So it was interesting being able to tell his story. A lot of our stories were just sort of like, if you've ever wondered what Vietnam looks like today, this is it. And so that was a lot of the angles we took on that.
Well, changing subjects, you were a great journalist, but you were also a real creative guy. Some of your stories landed in the newsroom with just great entertainment value, I guess, for us. Which of those do you remember having so much fun telling stories that were not necessarily gang and Vietnam related?
First of all, you're very kind because, and I know you did a lot of this later as well. There's such a thing as a slow news day. And there are going to be reporters who are told, "What's your story today?" And if you don't come up with something, an assignment editor will give you something you really don't want to be on.
Yeah.
Here, go do a story on agenda item 17 from today's city council meeting, in which they're going to discuss garbage rates. Not that that's not an important story, but it's a deadly TV story. So good reporters come up with their own ideas. So there were days when the first one, keep in mind, I'm working the night shift. So like on weekends, the night shift and the morning shift, it sort of feels like the boss isn't here.
A little independence. We
can do stuff that he wouldn't approve of. So one day on a Friday afternoon, everybody on Fridays, we're relaxed, it's a long week. I knew that there was a karaoke booth in Pioneer Courthouse Square. You go in and they pump music into the booth of some song, and you sang along with that song, the lead vocal, and they actually gave you the cassette tape. And they also broadcast your singing out over the square. So I said, let's do a story on the karaoke thing. And I had a little bit of music in my background, so I wasn't afraid to do this. I actually started the piece sitting at the piano at what was the fancy hotel bar at the bottom of Coin Tower? What did they call it back then?
That's not the Benson. That was a different one.
No, it was the Coin Building.
Yeah.
Anyway, they have a nice bar in there and a piano, and I'm over there playing and making fun of the song Feelings. And so the whole story, and it really doesn't make sense journalistically. Looking back, it's a little embarrassing, but I was young and dumb, and I was willing to do this for fun. So I sort of pretended that, I'm a lounge singer, but it's not working out. Hey, guess what? There's a karaoke booth. I'm going to record some hip rock and roll song. And here's how old I am. The hip rock song was something by Huey Lewis. And then at the end of the piece, we interviewed people throughout. Why are you here doing the karaoke thing? And then at the end of the piece, I'm back in the bar and I'm finishing up feelings because the whole rock and roll thing didn't work out. So that aired on a Friday night at 11. And I came in Monday at 2 or 2:30, and I hear Regan, Daly, get in here. I sort of felt like Woodward and Bernstein and All the President's Men when they were getting yelled at a lot during the. So I go in there thinking, this is going to be ugly. And Regan just thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. So that was great. I mean, I think they had never seen anybody do something that goofy before. And looking back, I was really stretching there was nothing journalistic about it at all. I guess I was sort of telling a story of a hip new trend, right?
Yeah, sure. I think so.
That much reporter involvement was a little embarrassing, but it was fun. And it showed them that I was willing to take chances. And then a little bit later on another slow news day, I did the
Well, let me tell you about karaoke. I did a karaoke too, but I had a news hook. And that was that the people were doing a karaoke marathon to raise money for Kobe, Japan after the earthquake.
Oh.
So I had the hook, and I did almost exactly what you just told me as I sang bad karaoke, but I had the news hook. I had journalism.
What was your song?
Oh, I did 5 or 6. I will send.
Why stop at 3? Just keep going.
I will send you the link, my friend. All right, next up, fun.
Yeah, I had another one that I really enjoyed, and that was, we were doing, a slow news day. And you know how there are certain things in your life. If you're a reporter, you're supposed to be curious. You're supposed to think about what's going on in my community. Well, one day I was so annoyed by leaf blowers.
Leaf blowers. That's the Tim Daly Hall of Fame story, I think.
Well, we all have to be remembered for something. So I decided to do a story on leaf blowers and how annoying they were. And we found this cute old lady up in the hills above the station who was sweeping. And man, she was sweeping like crazy. And she hated leaf blowers too. And then I found a guy who worked for the city who was downtown blowing leaves around. And I got his strategy for successful leaf blowing. And he was great. Because
they were kind of a new tool at that point. There was a newness to them.
Yeah, there was definitely a newness to them. That's, so I just wanted to do something that day. And then it occurred to me, you know what, we ought to rent a leaf blower and blow some leaves. I think just in general, we were just going to blow leaves.
But
the city has them, so do landscape companies and homeowners. And now you can rent them, which we did, just to see how some guy would react when the leaves were blown back up onto his property. Poor Earl nearly died when he saw all his hard work going down the drain. He didn't dare argue his blower wasn't nearly as powerful, but he soon learned he had an ally in the war against leaves.
Well, the city says put them in the street and they'll take care of them.
The city says they'll come.
I forget the photographer, and he was a good sport and he did a fabulous job. We were out in northeast Portland someplace. It may have been a fall day. There were leaves everywhere. And some poor old guy was out blowing leaves off his sidewalk towards the street. So I put a mic on, I had the leaf blower. It was a big, noisy leaf blower. And I had the photographer sit back on this street over here and watch me walk up and start blowing this guy's leaves back towards him.
It's like a candid camera moment.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well. You could hear me on the lav mic, it was surprising because these damn things are so loud. And then I ended the piece by helping him blow the leaves because I was ruining his day. And the poor guy, this was an uncool thing to do. If he didn't react well, we wouldn't have aired it that way. It was meant to be a feature story. So yeah, the leaf blower story was kind of fun.
Yeah, I think in itself, just the leaf blower story of, hey, this is a new tool. They're very effective, but man, aren't they annoying? And you got all these different opinions. There's a real value in that. But then when you guys came out with your own leaf blower and started going one-on-one with this guy. I mean, basically there are no rules. And that, the guy you could have been his neighbor saying, quit blowing him my way, I'll blow him back your way. Just the essence of that was just a wonderful story.
it also helped. I'm wearing a tie and a jacket. So
Yes.
I look like a dopey reporter. I don't look like the guy next door. It's like, what is this guy doing? So.
It's classic.
Yeah,
There's at least one other that I remember, a Tim Daly classic, was just simply going to a preschool and asking kids, how do you cook a turkey on Thanksgiving?
You know what's funny? I'd forgotten that story, and I can't believe that I'm the first to ever do this, but maybe I was the first in our newsroom, and I didn't realize I was stealing a pretty good story from somebody else. But yeah, if you ask kids, how do you cook a turkey, you're going to get great answers, because
Gold.
if if 6 hours at 350 works, it seems like 1 hour at 1,000,000 will probably work even better. Kind of, so I forget all their answers, but yeah, well, if you can get good sound bites out of kids, you're having an Art Linkletter career. But I should say that trying to interview children has been awful for me throughout my career. 35 years as a reporter, and I can count on one hand the good child interviews.
Well, there's the classic one of Nancy Francis asking some kid about the fair, and he just said, "I like turtles," and that became the viral video of that. But in that story, you just simply asked kids, and you got this very childlike, 1,000 degrees, 5 minutes. How do you, what do you put on the turkey? Chocolate, candy canes. You got all these innocent answers, and again, it was a great story because it was right at Thanksgiving. It was about kids and family, which the holiday is about, and it was adorable. And that one also lives in the lore at KGW. I hope you have a copy of it. I don't know if you do, but if not,
no. I don't.
We've got to go back to KGW then in the archives, because we know it aired around Thanksgiving between 1985 and 1991. There are only 4 or 5 shots at it, right?
Well, that's you're very kind to remember it that fondly, and I forgot. So. You know what's funny? Here's how reporters work. It's Thanksgiving. What's your story for this day? And you're going, I don't know. I can't go. There's no parade, and what am I going to do?
They're not talking about garbage rates at the city hall today.
Right. No, I came up with, Turkey Bowl. All these high school buddies all come back and play football games all around the city, and they all call them their game the Turkey Bowl because it's a Thanksgiving. So I did it at least twice in the Portland market. I think I did it 5 more times where I live now in the Sacramento market. You let it breathe every 3 or 4 years. You can dig that story up again.
I did it once.
Yeah, there you go. It's great video, especially if some guy breaks either an arm or a leg, and somebody will always break something. Yeah. Great sound, and then if you feel like doing a little reporter involvement, you take one snap as the quarterback and throw. Yeah. And try not to get hurt. So.
Yeah, I did it. We drove to as many of those games. We just drove around and found them, and I played one play in each game.
Ah, good. Yeah.
Let's say you spent time in the night shift. I don't know, by choice or whatever, but you got to do some entertainment stuff that was. That's one of the benefits of being there at night. Sometimes is you get to meet some people coming to town.
What's funny is my last year and a half or a couple of years, my wife and I had our only 2 kids in Portland, twin girls, and for us to make a schedule that would work with twins. My wife worked days, got home at 2. I handed off 2 children, and then I went to work. It had to work that way. So
yeah, we've all been there.
Ended up back on the night shift. So once again, if there are going to be slow news nights as well as slow news days, and if I went to them and said, "Hey, Jerry Seinfeld is in town tonight. I want to go do an interview with him," the answer always was, "Go, give us 2 minutes of something." They were. It's not that there was never any news in Portland, but there were just you needed a fun story for a newscast as well.
Yeah, very teasable. When the anchor got on, in prime time coming up tonight, Tim Daly talks with Jerry Seinfeld. I'm sticking around.
Sure, you would hope anyway. Yeah. So Seinfeld and Leno. There was all the local music that was really fun to tap into and explore. I mean, Curtis Salgado was coming out with a couple of his albums. Breaking out, at the time, I like jazz, so I would do a story every now and then with Tom Grant, or we'd go out to the Mount Hood Jazz Festival. New Shoes and Quarter Flash came out of Portland, so that you could always find a story that was in the entertainment field, and that was such a good town local music and for comedians coming to town. The weirdest, funniest experience, Dana Carvey, Dennis Miller, and Kevin Nealon were a triple bill when they were all big SNL stars. And they were performing on a Saturday night at the Schnitzer.
I remember this, Tim.
So Saturday afternoon, Mo, the late photographer Mo, and I forget Mo
Loman.
He and I went to their hotel rooms to interview them in the middle of the afternoon. And it was the most bizarre, strangest experience trying to interview entertainers or comedians. They were at the end of their tour. Dana Carvey was insane. Dennis Miller, I think, was the only normal one of the three. And Kevin Nealon sat in the corner hugging a couch pillow the entire time, talking to the couch. It was 2 PM. I think they'd already been at the bar, or they were certainly planning on the bar, and it was a bizarre setup, but it's a good memory.
I remember that story, and I don't know how you let the raw tape of that get out of your hands. I would have saved that forever, because they were, that was sketch comedy improv behind the scenes. Yeah.
It was, and Carl, we should probably mention, there you went through your comedy phase. We'd come see you a time or two hosting at, I forget the name of the comedy club down there. And
did you come see me at Harvey's?
Is that the name?
Yeah, down by the train station.
Yep.
You actually came and
if not twice, maybe twice.
Wow, twice is good. That means I wasn't terrible the first time.
No, you got invited back.
Yeah, I'm back on the circuit in the Central Oregon Bend comedy scene now, my friend.
Really?
Yeah. I got to show.
Is it real work, or are you volunteering?
Volunteer.
What's it going?
Oh, yeah, it's real stuff. I started back a couple years ago when we came over here. I found some open mics and started doing stuff, and hooked up with a producer here. Really? And and before COVID, I was doing a couple shows a month.
Good for you.
Thank you. And I had a show in Portland opening for Art Krug, one of the great stand-ups, and that was like going to be March 23rd or something. And of course, it got axed. And I'm hoping at some point I can get back to Portland so I can, show my friends there that I have new jokes.
How many minutes do you have? What's your program?
Actually, right now I have 2 different sets of 20 minutes.
That's impressive.
And some of it is parody songs with a guitar.
All right.
All right.
If that's not the cue to pick up your guitar and play for me, what is? Come on.
I'm doing an open mic on Wednesday, and I have a show coming up at the end of July. So that's my fun retirement activity.
I can't imagine doing that. It would terrify me. So I'm always impressed with somebody that can do that.
I think you would be better than you think. What's really funny is that most of the young people that I'm doing it with are young people, and I'm old enough to be their father. So you get this young guy and this young woman, and and then, all right, he's 61. Let's hear it for Carl Click.
They give your age when they introduce you?
Oh, I think I throw it out there really fast just so that everybody knows that where the perspective is going to be coming from. So
yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, some of us can't hide 61, but you still could if you wanted to go as 51. You could get away with it.
It was a sad day when you left Portland. You went back to Northern California so you could be around family, and then you had a really strong career. You were in Sacramento and covering a lot of government for more than 10, 12 years there.
Well, I was at the Sacramento ABC affiliate for 25 years, actually.
Okay.
And I actually, speaking of like I had a beat in Portland, my beat here I was in a bureau. Sacramento's a very large TV market geographically.
Right.
And I'm south of Sacramento by an hour. And I had 4 counties as part of my responsibility, plus Yosemite National Park, which was a beautiful assignment because at least twice a year I'm up in Yosemite. There was always something going on there.
Somebody was lost.
a lot of that. So I had a photographer that he and I got along beautifully. We worked together for 25 years and we got not let go. We were in 2016 when a lot of television people around the country were who fell under a particular corporate structure, the Tegna company. They approached us with the offer of, would you like to leave early and we'll make it worth your time? And that was an offer that we took. And so I had a great run in TV, but I could also sense that it was about over, and you sort of were telling the same stories over and over again after 35 years and after 25 years in a bureau. So the end came, and I think I had the best job of all time, but I haven't really missed it either. So I'm very fortunate to be able to describe it that way.
Yeah, I describe it similarly, Tim. 31 years, and I was ready to leave, and I got a little help, but no big deal. But I felt like I did it enough, and I did it well. I was proud of what I did, and it was nice to get out at a time where I was still young enough and energetic enough to try something else, to have a new adventure. And for me, it was teaching and coaching, and for you, it's you've been doing public information for several places, but right now, is it Fish and Wildlife in California?
Yeah, the Department of Fish and Wildlife in California has 3 public information officers. I'm now one of them. I've been doing it for almost 2 years. It's a lot of fun. I never imagined ending up in government or working in fish and wildlife. I'm not a hunter, and I don't spend a lot of time fishing, but they still like my communication skills and my ability to generate news coverage of things we do. And I am able to take photos and video out on particular stories, and I'm having a lot of fun doing that. And you know what, as you were talking about when we got out, we were both so lucky to be in this industry. And I hate to sound like the old guy who says it was better back in my day.
It's the good old days.
It was better back in our day. It's like we television stations were spending money and sending guys to Viet Nam. I had a lot of travel experiences here in Sacramento. And then it started to dry up, after probably 2010, you could see the end was coming for the good old days of television news. So I feel very fortunate to have done it when I did it.
Oh, good. Well, we were fortunate to have you in Portland for the 4 or 5 years that we had you, Tim. I was just, when I was thinking back talking to you, I remembered that our desks were right next to each other, and you were just a great guy to hang out with there and bounce stories around. And you did great work. And I'm glad that your career took the turn that it did, that you at least landed with us there at KGW for enough time to make an impact.
I loved coming to Portland. Like I said, that was the big city to me as a little kid. So to be able to live there and work there, and then to have anchors like Pete and Tracy, I felt like I was dealing with big time pros, and I was just that little kid just trying to learn and grasp everything. And what's funny is all those reporters who were in that newsroom, guys like Walden and Tuttle and Lou Frederick, these guys they kicked ass. So it's like you had a certain level you had to perform at and try and catch up with. And you were always learning because there were guys in that newsroom and women who really were top notch at their game and who weren't like trying to get to the next market. That was their market, that was their city, and they were going to do really good work there. So it was a great place to work. I was very fortunate. And we left when we left because we wanted to get those twin girls down near their grandparents. So that's how we ended up back in California.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, thanks for this chat. It's been great to relive all those great memories, and I'm glad you and Barbara are doing good. Great to see your face and hear the stories. It's been really fun.
Take care, Carl. Thanks for thinking of me and including me in this. I mean, everybody that's been doing this, there are these 25-year in Portland types, and I feel like I was in and out in just 5 years. So.
Well, I always like to answer the question, where are they now? So now we know. So
now you know.